Okay, so one last thing that I want to take a look at here, now that we've seen how to add a middleware function for verifying auth tokens, and we've seen how to apply that to specific routes just by the way we specify our route settings in each route file, the next thing I want to do is take a look at how to reduce our repetition even more by adding more middleware to specific routes. Okay, so if we open up our routes and just take a look at some of the code that's in there, I'm just going to open up all these files. One of the things that we see in a few routes is checking to see whether or not a user actually owns a note. Okay, so we have it in our update note route, we have it in our delete note route. It's the exact same code, right? In fact, you can flip back and forth between these and see that that part of the code doesn't actually change. Okay, and also this part above it doesn't change either. So what we're going to do is we're going to create some middleware that will take care of checking that for us. And what that's going to look like is this. We're going to create a new file in our middleware folder. And what we're going to call this new middleware, we're going to say something like user owns note.js. Okay? All right, and inside this file, we're going to write our middleware function, which will look something like this. We're going to say export const user owns note. And what this is going to do, it's going to take the request, response, and next. And we're going to have to make some assumptions inside this middleware that will probably be true, right? It's just something that we'll have to make sure of when we add this to different routes. The first assumption that we're going to make is that the path has a note ID in it. Okay, so our path is going to need to have a URL parameter called note ID that will allow us to actually figure out what note the user is trying to access. So that's the first assumption. All right, assumption number one. The second assumption is that this middleware is going to come after the verify ID token middleware. So what that means is that we'll already have access to the verified user inside this middleware on the request argument, okay? So we'll say after ID token middleware. And those are our two assumptions for now. I think that that's it, but maybe there will be one or two more. We'll see when we get there. So anyway, knowing that we have access to the note ID URL parameter, all we're going to do is I'm just going to go into update note route and copy this stuff here. And I'm going to put it inside this user owns note middleware now. And additionally, we're going to have to get the note ID by saying const note ID equals request.params. Okay? So anyway, that's what the middleware is going to look like. The last thing we need to do is just say next, and that will send the program on to whatever the corresponding route is that comes after this middleware. Okay, so let's add this to the corresponding routes and remove that logic that was inside of them. So for our update note route, we can just remove this part here. And in middleware, oops, which I've actually spelled wrong here. Let me try that again. Let me make sure I didn't. Oh no, it looks like I made the same typo all over the place. Let's change this. That's awful. All right. Yeah, middleware. I forgot the E and I copied it and pasted it. Genius, Sean. Genius. All right, so let's add the user owns note middleware to these routes now. And I removed all of the corresponding logic so far. And the same thing is going to be in our delete note route. We're going to add user owns note middleware. And down here, we can delete this same logic from there. Okay, and we are still going to need our note ID thing, but we won't actually need this auth user thing now because that was the only place we were using it inside this delete note route. Okay, and for update note route, the same thing is true. We no longer need auth user, but we do still need this verify auth token middleware because we still need it to protect our route from users who aren't authenticated. So anyway, one last thing that I'm noticing here just from the syntax coloring is that we didn't add the async keyword to user owns notes, so let's add that there. And let's test this thing out now. I don't think that there's anything else we need to do, although we might want to add something for this as well, since it looks very similar, and we're doing the same thing in our create note route. We'll come back for that, but let's first check our user owns note middleware. So what we're going to try and do again is we're going to try and just load a note that only this user should have access to. Oops, it looks like we have some kind of error going on here first. Verify auth token is not defined. That's because we need to actually import it. So let's say import verify auth token from middleware verify auth token. I think we might have to do that for some of these other ones as well. Okay, import verify auth token, and for update, we're going to have to do the same thing, import verify auth token. And we also have to import user owns note, which apparently wasn't imported either. Okay, so for that one and for this one, we're going to have to import those, user owns note. And that should be all for now. Oops, it looks like we still have a Babel parse error. What's going on here? It looks like I re-imported this and delete note route. So, oh yeah, there it is. All right, so I can delete that. Anything else? All right, it looks like I might have done the same thing here. Yep, sure enough, I missed it. I don't know what I was thinking there when I did that. So I'll delete that again. Anything else? All right, it looks like we just got that address and use thing. So let's restart our app and everything should be working now, hopefully. All right, so we're just going to test it in our user interface here first, and then we'll try and hack it using Postman. So first of all, we'll try adding a note. Looks like that works. We'll try editing a note like this. Looks like that works. Oops, looks like that doesn't work actually. So let's see what's going on here when we try and update our note. What are we getting back from the server? Looks like that's just pending, so some kind of error is happening here. And that error, it just says notesDB is not defined, so we need to import that as well into our user owns note. So we're just going to need to say import notesDB. Man, I really was not on it with the imports here, was I? We're just going to import notesDB, and is there anything else that we need? I don't believe so. It looks like that's probably it. So let's try this again. All right, server's listening on port 8080. Let's go back to our front end and try and edit this note again. We're going to click on Save Changes. And it looks like we're still not getting it. Let's see what's going on again. Okay, auth user is not defined. Yes, because we forgot to say const auth user equals request.user, right? Because this comes after the other middleware. So once again, let's try and edit this note. We're going to click on Save Changes. And there we go. So we can edit our notes now to our heart's content, and everything is working there. So let's try deleting a note now. That's our last thing we're going to have to check. And if we click on yes here, it looks like something went wrong. Let's click on inspect and see what's up. All right, let's go to our network tab, and we're going to click the delete button again. Click yes. And let's go back to here and see what's going on here. So it looks like in our delete note route, it says note is not defined, and that's because we actually removed the logic for loading the note inside of here. So this brings me to something else I wanted to talk about, and that is, while we're saying whether the user owns the note or not, why don't we just take this note and stick it onto the request object? We can do that by saying request.note equals note, and then inside our delete note route, instead of having to load the note again, what we're going to do is say const note equals request.note, and that should get rid of the error we were seeing. Let me just do a quick scan and see if there's anywhere else we were doing that, like in our delete note route or in our update note route. Nope, it looks like all of those were good. So let's go back and try deleting this note again. We're going to click on the delete button, click yes, and it looks like something happened again. So cannot read property created by of null. Oh, you know what? This is just happening because the note was actually deleted from the database, but it's still in our front end. So let's refresh our front end here. And yep, we're getting that same kind of error that we got from before. Basically, when it's deleted from the notes database, but not from the users database. Now, I will admit that I was very tempted to cut this stuff out in the editing process, but I wanted to leave it because honestly, this is the kind of error that you run into quite frequently in full stack development, and sometimes you just want to pull your hair out. So I wanted to show you how I would go about troubleshooting this thing, and I really want you to be familiar with this kind of perma crash sort of error that's caused by inconsistent data in the database. So to fix this, we're just going to have to go back into our database and do something like what we saw before. We're going to say db.users.findPretty. One of these note IDs here doesn't exist anymore, so let's say db.notes.findAll.pretty. And let's see here. Which note no longer exists? It looks like it's this CF blah 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 one. So let's copy this, and we're going to remove that note from our user's notes property. So we'll say db.users.find, or .update anyway, .update1. We're going to need the user's ID, so I'm going to have to copy that first, actually. Oops, and that should be ID. There we go. And now we're going to update this note by saying $pull, and we want to remove from the notes property the ID, this one right here, which I'm going to copy and paste. Oops, there we go, paste that here, and close off our curly braces and hit enter. And now our user should no longer have that ID on there, which means we should be able to go back here, refresh, and have it work just like before. So let's test out our delete function again. We're going to try and delete one of these notes, and sure enough, it works now. So after that fiasco, our middleware is now working just the way we wanted it to, and our code is a lot less repetitive, although perhaps some would argue a little more error prone. The choice is yours at the end of the day over whether you want to do these things or not, and whether or not you think that these really add to your code. If you find that things like this make your code harder to maintain, then by all means just write that repetitive code in your routes. So anyway, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.